So let me talk about some ethical duties of medical professionals, citizens in our governments in the age of informed choice, refugees, and coronavirus 2019, COVID-19. So I want to talk then about medical heroes in epidemics, i.e. heroes, comparing SARS and COVID 2019, principles of bioethics and human rights, ethical duties of medical professionals, ethical duties of citizens and governments, what's the age of informed choice, and refugees and bioethics. So first, let me show you some slides from part of a paper I published in the Journal of Infection in 2004 after the SARS epidemic, called Heroes of SARS, Professional Roles and Ethics of Healthcare Workers. I published with one of my doctoral students from Taiwan at the time, who was subsequently a professor in Taiwan. I think you've heard of SARS. Yes? Can you remember SARS?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, but
So how many people died in SARS infection?
Yes.
I don't remember it.
yes, how many people died? I don't remember for that.
Maybe
Around
2,000 around.
Yeah, yes, less than 2,000. In fact, coronavirus overtook SARS a few weeks ago in terms of the number of people who passed away. So the paper, I wrote that paper to examine the professional moral duty of healthcare workers in the outbreak of severe acute respiratory syndrome. We used a descriptive discussion of media reports, analysis of ethical principles and political decisions discussed in the outbreak, with particular emphasis on the events in mainland China and Taiwan. The results found there were differences in the way that Taiwan and mainland China responded to the SARS epidemic. However, both employed techniques of hospital quarantine. After early policy mistakes in both countries, the healthcare workers were called heroes. The label hero may not be appropriate for the average healthcare worker when faced with the SARS epidemic, although a number of selfless acts can be found. The label was also politically convenient. So conclusions were a middle ground for reasonable expectations from healthcare workers when treating diseases that have serious risk of infection should be expected. While all should act according to the ethic of beneficence, not all persons should be expected to be martyrs for society. So one of the sections was enforced heroes, ? Can someone who makes an involuntary sacrifice be called a hero? Most nurses and doctors actually died from taking care of SARS patients involuntarily, except for those on international teams who actively sought out SARS patients. Most did not choose to do so. In the large-scale hospital quarantines in Beijing and Taiwan, the hospitals were encircled and no one could leave. Many healthcare workers in Taiwan thus denied the title of hero. Some said that more people call them in this way, the more they fear that they're in danger. So, when we compared to coronavirus 2019, it wasn't just the hospital that was encircled, it was the entire province of Hebei with 60 million people. So it's a rather larger scale of quarantine. But in SARS, it was encircling hospitals. And personally, one of the most interesting stories for me was giving a lecture like this in medical school of Beijing University on the day before the government came clean on announcing the real number of cases of SARS, because the doctors in the hospital told me that actually there are more patients with SARS in our hospital than have been reported to the whole of China, but it's just being hidden. So we were talking about quarantine and other issues at that time. So in this case, in the COVID-2019 case, the government came clean more quickly than it did in SARS. So perhaps it has learned some lesson. But the scale of the issue of the quarantine was much larger, where the city of Wuhan, was shut down, 10 million people. Whereas in SARS, it was just hospitals were encircled. So if your campus here, they would put the gate would become a curfew zone and everyone would have to stay on campus for a few weeks. That would be the state for the quarantine at that stage for SARS. Another topic in the paper was the duties to patients versus family. So many healthcare workers in modern times have only faced remote fears of death. And it's a shock for many to realize that their own lives are in danger. When they considered that even with necessary precaution, they still had to run a certain amount of risk, their duties of being a wife or husband, mother or father, or daughter or son will call them home. Please come home. Although SARS was reported to have a relatively low mortality rate, it attacks the young and healthy as well as the old and frail. Moreover, this is a totally new disease. We know very little about it. The fear and worry of being infected will always be a shadow to their care. Will the public accept a health professional to exercise their right to remain off the job in this critical moment? So every person of any profession has their personal role in the family to be a father, mother, spouse, or child, in addition to their professional roles. The constitution of most countries respects a person's human rights and ego beyond the superego. That is, an ego is a basic human nature which should be honored too. Part of the love of life that makes the bioethics of an ethical person in ethical theories is self-love, not just love of others. Those medical practitioners should stick to their post, should be respected. However, those who need to take a break to recover themselves would also be acting within their human rights and what is expected of a reasonable citizen. There are cases recorded where doctors spend weeks continuously battling the disease, and there is a need for proper assessment of how fatigue may have led to mistakes in care for patients and mistakes in precautions of carers. And from the figures we have seen from COVID-2019, it recorded that it was around 90,000 people infected, and 3,000 healthcare workers were infected, but actually a lower number of mortality in the healthcare workers in China. 18 are officially recorded as dying from COVID-19. 18. But this in China, but this record from 3,000 is a lower actually mortality rate than the general public. But of course, many of the doctors should be fit. But several of those deaths were from heart attack. We had one doctor who, after 18 days without a break, went home and went to sleep and never woke up. Okay, so this was a fatigue. Of course, they may have been infected as well. So, if we compare SARS and COVID-2019, SARS was in limited countries. COVID-2019 is global. I'm not sure if officially in Turkey there are any cases. I think they were trying to say that there were not, but obviously there will be. Sorry to anybody who's upset with me saying that, but it's obvious every country around it has, you must get it. more infections, higher total mortality from COVID-2019, but the mortality rate for SARS is higher. I think a higher proportion of healthcare worker infections in SARS. Quarantine is found in both cases, but different styles of quarantine. And I think COVID-2019 has seen more severe travel bans and airline closures. Yesterday I flew on Turkish Airlines, and at the check-in it said, we do not permit even the transfer of patients from these countries, including, and I think if you're going to include all the countries with COVID-19, soon it will be every country, and the airline will have to decide which countries it's going to accept patients from, or passengers from. And should you have this group punishment in a sense, or quarantine, it's an ongoing question. Another slide, becoming a national martyr. What does it mean? Well, in response to the shortage of healthcare work professionals in the COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan and Hebei province, the Chinese government declared that healthcare work professionals who die fighting the epidemic will become national martyrs. This means that their children will have preferential entry and scholarships for all their education, a pension for their family, and many more benefits. It's trying to encourage healthcare workers. So if your 2-year-old child survives you because you died, they will get scholarships all the way, including up to getting their postgraduate degree in elite universities, in return for you being a martyr. And I have a martyr's pension for the family as well. So this is sort of an encouragement to be a hero. When there were discussions, these are taken off the web in some countries, but questioning when people say they don't want to be, working all the time and dying. But I think the incentive from the government to become a martyr doesn't make their action less worthy of praise. I mean, it's great. They remain as heroes. But we should not regard those who need a rest or need to be with their family as cowards, because this is the opposite of a hero. There are also other professionals exposed to risk of harm in the transportation sector, tourism, and so on. Many people. So how do we deal with professional duties? So let's come to talk about some bioethics principles. Bioethics emerged since human beings have been known to have relationships with other people. But new technology has been a catalyst for re-examination of medical ethics and international dialogue on ethical principles. We have fields such as medical ethics, dental ethics, environmental ethics, public health ethics, applied ethics, ethics, biotechnology. Confucius said to love a thing means wanting it to live. So this is a starting point for our common philosophy. Bioethics is a bridge breaking boundaries, dialogue and diversity. So can we reach consensus on these questions of being a hero, or who to quarantine, or what's a policy? One way to view ethics is descriptive ethics, is the way people view life, their moral interactions and responsibilities with living organisms in their life. So I think love of life is a common ethic across different cultures. For example, this is a picture of prayer requests. Praying is a common response to what we would like in the future. And when we have these crises, often we pray, dear God, please help us, or please protect us. So this is a fairly common. We may do it in different manners. We can also describe the level of participants in relationships. So what is a doctor above a patient, a paternalistic model? Is a doctor at the same level as a patient, informed consent? Is a patient above a doctor, informed choice? So what is our picture of our relationships? And how is it changing over time?
We are now in informed choice age, huh?
Are we in the age of informed choice? For some things we are.
Yes, in some situations we are.
Yeah. Okay, so for example, you can choose the style of glasses that you wear. Yeah, in this country, I think.
Yes.
That's, or you can choose contact lenses or color your contact lenses. You can color your hair or shave your hair or do whatever you like. We can wear different styles of clothing. But can we choose the type of medical treatment that we receive? We can choose to have a vaccination or not.
Can we hear these slides later?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm not taking that photo, because it's a very interesting one.
So balancing ideals of doing good against not doing harm, of individual autonomy and justice to all. Long heritage seen in biology, medicine, social systems and religion. Do you like the dog?
Yeah,
sure.
This is a Japanese dog at Fukushima with a Geiger counter to check if the dog is radioactive or not. Okay. So many people give their pets, you know, what do you do with your pets? Can you take your pet back into your home if they're a little bit radioactive? Okay. You know, people love their pets, but do you need to shampoo them or do you need to quarantine them? What are the languages of bioethics? So I try to introduce an alternative language instead of autonomy is self-rule, but I use the term self-love. Justice is love of others. To do no harm is loving life. Beneficence is loving good. So you'll see the references in my writings to bioethics, that is the love of life, and I'm using these languages as principles. In the same way that we have ethical imperatives, if you're familiar with German philosophy, I use imperatives of love. So the ethical principle of loving good, beneficence supports the development of science and technology that might cure sick persons or feed hungry people. The ethical principle of loving life, do no harm, warns us to do technology assessment on all options, current and new, to provide the best alternative for the local situation now. The ethical principle of loving others makes us to consider the risks for future generations and for all to share in the fruits of scientific endeavour. Benefit sharing of technology, affordable healthcare for all, poverty eradication. And respect for the ethical principle of self-love supports empowerment of people so that they can access technology according to their values. So we all have our own values. Can we access technology according to that? So ethics is really the art of balance. Some people consider medicine to be an art of healing. And so how do we balance ethical principles? Benefits versus harm. Autonomy versus justice. So my liberty versus looking after everybody. Autonomy versus non-maleficence. So why should I be in quarantine versus doing no harm? Just because I'm Italian, shouldn't I be allowed to fly on Turkish Airlines? Well, apparently not, because some people in Italy have come down with COVID-19. It's very interesting because for whom and which stakeholders? So What about the people with flu? If you have flu, you can fly, and if you have COVID-19, you can't fly. Okay. If you have tuberculosis at different stages, are you really quarantined as much? Probably not.
Yeah.
So interesting how we form these balances. Let's also compare public health versus clinical ethics, because in bioethics we include both, but they have different issues. So a clinical ethics dilemma, this is three perspectives on the same case. A traffic accident victim is brought to the emergency room unconscious. Should she be put on life support? A medical ethics dilemma. 8 accident victims await paramedics at the scene. The paramedics apply triage to decide the order of treatment. Who will be left to die? Who will be left to survive and be patient? And who needs to be rushed to the hospital or have the treatment? A public health dilemma. There's no central dividing barrier on this dangerous bend in the road where there are fatalities every year. Okay? And this is why we have traffic accidents in this part of the road every year. And people die, and the paramedics go there every year. But nobody wants to spend the money to put the concrete barrier on the road. Okay, so that's, or people have other reasons. So this is different perspectives at looking at the same issue with different eyes. Another way to view ethics is prescriptive ethics, is to tell others what's ethically good or bad, or what principles are most important in making such decisions. It may also be to say that something or someone has rights and others have duties to them. So, for example, the preamble to the Constitution of the World Health Organization has prescribed or described, it's told us that health is a complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic, or social condition. And the health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security, and is dependent upon the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. So a difficult concept like health, we might have a description, but how do we apply this to bioethics? Are you healthy? I hope so.
Yes, sir. I hope so.
Some of you don't look so happy. I'm not sure.
Infection, we are not sure.
Not sure. International standards for bioethics. So, in the 3 sets of international standards for bioethics from UNESCO, all used the human rights framework because that is a common agreement of countries. And all called for the establishment of ethics committees, for looking at ethical principles. They had particular designs on the covers. I'm just showing you an illustration of the Thai version in 1997, the Vietnamese version in 2013, of a different declaration and English version. So we translate in different countries, but all the countries agreed. Okay, so whether you're in Thailand or North Korea or United States or Turkey, every country agreed to these ethical principles, and how to balance is of course a question. So the 2005 Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights includes a set of principles that every country agrees to. That is a starting point for our dialogue. So whether I come from Russia or New Zealand or Turkey or Thailand or Philippines, I can discuss consent, number 4. 7, privacy and confidentiality. Equality, justice and equity. Number 11, solidarity and cooperation. Even though some countries have no universal healthcare system, or some countries don't seem to show much solidarity to their citizens, at least they agreed in principle. Some of the articles have been further developed, of course, by detailed analysis papers or reports. Article 8, the respect for human vulnerability and personal integrity, says in applying and advancing scientific knowledge, medical practice and associated technologies, human vulnerability should be taken into account. Individuals and groups of special vulnerability should be protected and the personal integrity of such individuals respected. Okay, so let's apply this principle to people who may be at risk of COVID-19, or people who actually have been diagnosed. They are a group of special vulnerability. They should be protected. Personal integrity should be respected. But how do we do this in a quarantine situation? We also can apply this to refugees. How can we respect them? Can you see the pictures of refugees being shot at by border guards, okay, or via tear gas at children? This is apparently an approach to dealing with refugees, but it seems to forget their human rights and their vulnerability. So I think we have the principles, but we have to think about how to apply this, and we're going to come to our duties and responsibilities. Article 14 on social responsibility. So what is bioethics? Well, if we look further down this, access to adequate nutrition and water, number 2. So the right to food, the right to water. 3, improvement of living conditions and the environment. What about poverty and poor environments? 4, elimination of marginalization and exclusion of persons on the basis of any grounds. Okay, so here we have exclusion of persons because of their nationality. You are forbidden to fly anymore. Okay. Yeah. United States a few weeks ago said, well, we won't accept any people coming who've been in China, which certainly affected many tourists and the tourist operators and the travel industry, but also affected families and other people. If you're, of course, they made exceptions for residents of the country, but we see these travel bans, which generally the World Health Organization, the WHO, has said should not be imposed, but national governments afraid and trying to think that they can protect themselves.
There is a new concept like bioracism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Or medical racism, like
Yeah.
through a virus.
Yes.
Now we can group people and become, I don't want to say hostile, but we become very discriminative.
Yes, well, in a sense, in the early days of this COVID-19, the focus was on China. So Chinese, French people were discriminated in Paris because they're Chinese. We don't want you to come to our restaurant because you're Chinese. But now, I mean, unfortunately for people who die in Italy, but fortunately for a global sense of people in Iran, people in Italy, people in the United States, people of every race, people in Nigeria, everyone is getting the virus. So hopefully this will stop the racism that was occurring.
Yeah.
But this is this discrimination is a sad thing for people.
Yesterday, I think one person from Taiwan in a European country, I don't remember it, beaten.
Really?
Yeah, and one person said to him, "We don't you and your coronavirus.
We don't want you
Stay
and your
away. You and your coronavirus. Your coronavirus."
Obviously, it's a part of an identity.
Yeah.
Yes, the racism.
This is a new kind of racism.
New kind of racism, actually. It's interesting. Is there a term called bioracism? Molecular racism.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
What is it? No?
It's certainly emerging, but I don't know if it's so new because, you know, we can write a paper on it.
It was just interesting because there, as far as I understand, human beings throughout the history have used pandemics.
Yeah.
We have seen maybe SARS and also Ebola. But all these, as you very well described the difference, like the first ones were kind of more local. This one is becoming global, more global. It's creating also new terminologies and concepts.
Yes.
Something to be focused on. Yes, we can write a paper and the seed is from Chaba. You know, wonderful, it's a terminology.
Yeah. So we need, of course, ethics committees. Now, coming to this concept of informed choice, what's the origins of informed choice? Because the first article of both covenants on human rights is the same. It says all peoples have a right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Now, you know English. There is a difference between people and peoples. Why in the United Nations do they use the term peoples? It's part of your history lesson, since many of you are studying history. So peoples refers to different peoples, indigenous peoples, nationalities, ethnicities. It's different to all people. So people are individuals, but peoples are groups of different nations and different sovereign states. In 1945, when the United Nations Charter was established and they've kept the same language in these conventions, there were, you know how many countries there were in the world? Legally, about 50, because most were colonies. But actually currently there are 200 countries legally now. But actually there are around 4,000 peoples in the world, 4,000 or 5,000 peoples in the world, at least. So this was an early recognition of indigenous rights of different people. Okay, so it's an interesting concept. So in China, in fact, there are 50 ethnic groups. In India, officially 330 ethnic groups in India. In the United States, there are 566 official indigenous tribes. I don't know in Turkey how many indigenous tribes are recognized.
Well, we keep paying prices. Don't ask about this opportunity to ask because we constantly have this Kurdish-Turkish conflict.
Yeah.
But there are also many other.
There are many others too. Yes.
Yeah. But it's very political. We don't take it into consideration as a bioethics matter. It's a political situation in Turkey.
Yes.
It's a bioethical subject.
Yes, but it's a sensitive subject.
Sensitive subject.
The same, yeah. So you have
Exactly.
when I grew up, the USSR or CCCP
Okay.
was one country.
CCCP.
Yes, you know CCCP. And
Sovyet Sosyalist Cumhuriyetler Birliği.
and then you have President Gorbachev, who was a hero to some parts of the world and a traitor to other parts of the world. Yeah. And how many ethnicities. So when you're trying to keep the country together, like mega countries like China or Russia or the United States or India, you try to avoid these discussions. But actually, it's one view. But then on the other hand, you have countries like Turkey as a crossroads between Asia and Europe, has many mixed populations. So again, that's another interesting concept. And how do you describe even the term race? How do we use it? Well, coming back to informed choice. So in this transition from paternalism, consent to choice, we're in this transition. We see the active use of the telephone here, taking pictures. This is an information age. Translating. It's a wonderful technology.
Yeah.
It allows informed choice. Using the telephone to translate the slides as we go.
Yes.
Yes, so for example, when we do training workshops in Taiwan, China, we see many people use Google Translate on the Chinese and out comes English. It's amazing. And vice versa. So this is a wonderful technology. Ways to view ethics. The third one, interactive ethics, is discussion and debate between people, groups within society, and community. Such dialogue skills are necessary to live harmoniously with others. So in a discussion or workshop, we have interaction.
Please keep one.
Practical bioethics is actually to make the world more bioethical. For example, health projects for medically deprived populations and environmental activism. So this in the UBIAS Declaration of Bioethics in 2002, practical bioethics was one of our approaches as well. So here we're going to come back to the topic of refugees, but we could argue that Turkey has been the most practically bioethical country in terms of looking after refugees in the world in the last decade. 3 million refugees or more, whereas some of the European countries who claim to be more ethically principled or claim to be somehow more politically correct actually don't take refugees.
This phrase of yours would make our government very happy.
Yeah,
This is very good what he said. He said Turkey behaved very ethical in the way of taking care of refugees.
Yes.
Whereas other,
Then after
whereas other, we gave a very good example. I think we gave a very good example. We did the right thing.
Yes, we do, and in fact, you have currently the other big questions of bioethics right now. In Turkey. In fact, it's interesting with the intervention in Syria. When is there a just war? When do you have a duty to protect? And very, very important questions. And so these are really practical questions. Of course, there are other reasons which we'll come to as to why countries may need to be practical and ethical. Protecting the dignity of people is a universally agreed goal of the United Nations. We have to protect dignity. What are minimum standards of dignity? It's human beings' innate right to respect. We should receive ethical treatment from others and also have the responsibility to treat others ethically. Without dignity, we cannot be really happy, although many persevere despite the abuse received by others or neglect of basic needs. So what are the government responsibilities? These include meeting 4 conceptual pillars of human security that have evolved in the scientific and political debate. People have a right to freedom from fear. Freedom from what? Freedom to live in dignity, freedom from hazard impacts. Okay, so these are expressions of human rights in a different manner. So human security is critical. There's people have, the right to food and water. They should not be wanting these things. They should not be fearful of their existence, living under the threat of bombing or attacks every day. Freedom to live in dignity, not to be slaves. Freedom from living in, free of disasters. I have heard that there's some earthquake damage to this building. I have yet to see it. Touch wood, so we're under the table, not yet. But, this is, maybe you get a new building eventually.
We hope so.
In fact, I lived in my hometown of Christchurch and in Japan. I'm used to earthquakes all the time, so touch wood. So disaster ethics, innovation and social governance by developing ethics committees in broader areas. Events such as major disasters are catalysts for re-examination of applied ethics and social ethics also. So we have to think about engineering ethics, medical ethics, risk analysis, public health ethics, public policy ethics, representation. Do we want to shut down the university because there's a risk that if it's a magnitude 9 earthquake, the building may collapse? Well, magnitude 9 earthquakes do occur, we saw it in Japan, but they're not very common. So we need to make a balance. What is acceptable risk? So in Japan, there are tsunamis, because of the closeness to the deep ocean. And some valleys get the tsunami every 60 years. The 15-meter tsunami is quite high. So there's a stone put on the side of a hill, and it says usually a big wave came, a tsunami came, many people died, don't build below the stone. The stone is a marker. We don't build below the stone. But because the coastal valleys, it's much easier to cultivate in the valley. People tend to live in the valley. And after 10 years, they go back and live in the valley, and you just have to be prepared to run. But people will die when there's a big tsunami. So we may have to make a balance. The last few slides on a paper I wrote in 2015 in Turkish Journal of Bioethics.
Turkish Journal, yes, I have seen.
Refugees and bioethics, and I thought, I was asked to write a paper, can you write a paper? And I thought, well, the most appropriate topic would be refugees and bioethics, so I actually wrote about it. Because migration is a feature of human beings. And as a person who does not believe in nationality as a barrier, and you're welcome to see my passport if you like. And you may find it interesting that my passport has, at the beginning of it, a picture of two queens, an English queen and a Maori queen. And it is bilingual, the passport, with both Maori language and English language. These are our two languages in New Zealand. And we say, well, the indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori tribes, came in 17 boats around 700 years ago. But before that time, the indigenous residents of New Zealand were birds, like kiwis, and moas. So you can open it and look inside, you can see the two languages. And in our country, we have two official languages in Parliament, Maori and English. And kia ora is how most people
Which one is common?
English is most common. And what's interesting is when the Maori members of Parliament are upset, they will start to speak in Maori. And it was not so many of my generation of New Zealanders know Maori, and they have to use the interpretation. This is always interpretation. So they do it more as but nowadays in schools much more. But we have many New Zealanders from other countries. So English New Zealanders many came around the last 200 years. But now we have many. We have Turkish, we have Chinese, we have Indian, we have people from all around the world. So migration is a feature. But why do some people are legal refugees or migrants and some are not? It's a big discussion. Minorities and discrimination. So this issue then comes to groups of people. Some are regarded as not native or not safe or dangerous people or quarantine. So we have this. And then there's ethical implications upon a refugee of being a refugee. So what do we take as a human right? Well, we have human rights, whether we're a refugee or not. But our citizenship rights may be different. So in this presentation, I opened the grounds for you to think about medical refugees, people who are quarantined, and those who are socioeconomic refugees or refugees from political violence or other forms of violence against people. So who decides our duties? Can we reach a consensus as a profession? Can this be determined by the government, or by ethicists, or historians, or citizens? What are the conditions required for happiness? A good quality of life, hope for the future, dreaming and planning, self-love and fulfillment? If we take away the dreams of people, is this a serious infringement? So I think challenges are opportunities. Challenges to the status quo can be a catalyst for re-examination of our ethics and stimulate broader dialogue and ethical principles. So we have both in the refugee crisis and now in the health crisis in COVID-19 a great challenge, because we can see once a country has one or two cases, it is now on the map as a country who is somehow contaminated or dangerous. But every country is going to get this virus. This virus is going to become endemic. It's the manner of which it's spreading. It's clear. No country can protect itself. And it's going to be very interesting to look at the way and document the way that we're responding, I think. And in terms of the division of us and them, when them becomes the people outside. So my overall goals, how do we form a mature society full of well-informed and balanced persons? Bioethically mature means a person or a society that can balance the benefits and risks of alternative options and make well-considered decisions and talk about it. We should not have a phobia, we should not have xenophobic attacks on people because they're considered to be dangerous, or a refugee, or a dangerous person, or people of different sexual orientation are considered in some countries to be criminals. So finally, for those who don't know, what is American University of Sovereign Nations? So graduate education with a flexible schedule, you can work through the requirements at your own pace. Decolonized education, celebrate wisdom from each country. A global hub for education, international exchanges, expertise to assist in professional services. And this is a photograph of me with 3 of my fellow professors who were all born in Tanzania. Okay. So, sorry, you can't see. So this is my colleague Hassan Kaya, who's a professor at Durban of Indigenous Knowledge Systems. Durban is in South Africa. This is John Kabudi, he's a Minister of Justice in Tanzania. Why do I like him so much? He immediately, as I asked him to be a professor, he said he also wants to be a PhD student. He's a Minister of Justice. He wants to learn. Joseph Ryan, born in Tanzania, Indian Sikh, and we're working together in the Sikh Human Rights Group. That's why I'm going to Geneva this afternoon, and myself. And this is so people may not work in the countries they are. We have more than 100 faculty. We're honoured for people to join us, and the idea is to establish us in every country in the world, and through Skype and through sessions.
And we can offer these master programs to our students,
Yes.
research assistants.
Yes, we can. So we have master's programs, and doctoral program, and certificate programs.
And also workshops.
And workshops. And a workshop people can get credit from, this lecture, they can join the workshops, and they can be working at their own pace. So this is our first graduation on purpose was in the Asia-Africa Summit Hall in Bandung, Indonesia. Now you may not know, in 1955, it was in the Cold War between CCCP and USA, and many countries did not like this, so they established the G77, the non-aligned movement was established. And you can go, we had this, our first graduation on purpose here. You can still ring the peace gong in Bandung, in Indonesia. President Suharto organized a meeting of the non-aligned movement. At the time, 7 African countries came, but none of them were independent. The freedom fighters came, but many of the Asian countries had become independent after World War II. So World War II was the catalyst to that was one of the big issues, was the change of colonialism. We have MOUs with many institutions. We're working, and we last April had a wonderful workshop and meeting with Professor Khan and Edith. So these are our websites, and there are thousands of papers on these websites for those interested in libraries. Everything should be public. So I hope that's been interesting for you and open some questions. Welcome to have a dialogue or criticism or comments.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
Is this term informed choice now a common terminology, or is it something that you created as you said, by a love of bioethics?
It's something that I used from around 1994.
Okay.
So it is common now. And as to the origin, in the 1990s, I certainly started to use it, and I saw more people starting to use it. And now I think it's common.
It's really interesting
Yeah.
as a concept. It was very, very nice talk. Thank you very much. It opened my horizons and brought interesting questions like how do we look at healthcare professionals if they don't want to work all the time? Does it make them not to be a martyr anymore? Should we continue to respect them? Of course, right? They are also human beings.
Soru sorabilir miyim hocam?
Tabii.
Yeah.
Çin'de bu Covid'den sonra sanayinin durmasıyla havasının temizlendiği, bunun da aslında iyileşmede etkili olduğu söyleniyor bazı kaynaklarda. Ne kadar doğrudur? Hani
It's interesting, Darryl, there's an interesting question from here.
Yeah.
She asks, she read in some sources that after the, after the virus in China, industry has stopped and it cleaned the air, and this air cleaning has also a positive impact on the healing of the patients. Can it be true?
Yeah. Yes, well, without the pollution in China from the factory is shocking. It's very serious. So, yes, when you close dirty factories down, you help the air quality.
And it's normal, that so it affects positively on people's health conditions.
It affects people positively on their respiration. But if you have no money, you may be stressed. So actually, maybe you get more stress from losing your wages.
Bu
Yeah.
sefer de ekonomilerini kaybediyorlar.
Ya bu
Bu
sefer
da stresten sağlıklı tehlikeye girebilir. Doğru. Hava temizlendi ama bu sefer de ekonomi çöküyor.
bütün dünyada mesela azaltılsa hani bu bir öneri olamaz mı? Yani bütün dünyadaki bu sanayi biraz kendine artık çeki düzenlense.
Hani şey sezileriyle for all countries, every industry, all industries in every country can a bit slow down, but then Hakan Hoca says, but then it's a collapse in the economy, and it's a different stress.
So this is a challenge. Of course,
Etik olsalar en azından. Yani
Daha etik
bağlantılarsa.
this is an ethical balance. And the other question was sort of price of human life.
Ya tabii çok güzel. O da diyor ki eğer biz bedelini yani bu sanayileşmenin bedelinin insan sağlığıyla ödüyorsak evet bu yapılabilir diyor yani.
It's very difficult.
Hayal.
Nowadays.
Dünyada insan sağlığının dışında pek az kişi olduğu için
İşte ne güzel.
Bazı ekonomide
insan
Değil mi? Çok hoş.
İnsanlığa dair umudum oldu gerçekten.
Evet evet.
Yani
konuşması daha önemli.
Evet, evet. Keşke
Buna
bunu...
çok az kalmış.
Evet.
Bunlar bir tane
Türkçesini de buna benzer bir mimaride sizler bize şey yapsanız keşke.
Yes, and now we have a duty. I have to translate these slides into Turkish
Okay.
and make it in the university again. Okay.
Okay.
I will do that because she asked really a very good question. But maybe there are some sentences were not understood by them, so I will do that.
Aklımda
We can
sizler
put
olmuş.
it on the university website.
University website.
ben şuradan
Yapalım.
okuyacağım.
Çevirelim, üniversite websitesine koyalım.
Benim
İş çıktı evincimizde, yapalım.
Evet, ortak şey.
Yes.
I wonder that,
Çok önemli.
you know, there was a biggest one in the history called Spanish flu
ben burada bu
Yes.
in 1918,
Yeah.
and around 100 million people died in that time. But nobody compared it to today's outbreaks. Is there anything to get from this historical event, historical outbreaks? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so about the Spanish flu, so some people do compare. I did not compare to Spanish flu. Let's imagine in the worst case scenario that COVID-19 continues for the next 6 months. Then we will have to compare to Spanish flu. But some of the things, the transport today means it's so difficult. We close down border. At some stage, they'll have to say, well, every country has it, so we can't close down the border anymore. Tourism will just be totally destroyed. We have to open it again and use precautions. Because once it becomes endemic to a country, then what's the sense of closing the borders down?
I think it began in France, it spreads to the United States,
Yeah.
and maybe we can say we don't want to be with French people and their virus. It's possible.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes,
one
I
kind of racist.
Yes, well, I think that, it'd be interesting in the history of medicine, if you look at this to compare, that people do consider that the Spanish flu was for 2 years, or, I think 2-year period.
During the World War One.
Yeah, yeah, and so it affected globally. So if it does continue, if it's COVID-19, it seems, fortunately SARS seems that it was stopped.
Yeah.
It was localized, but COVID-19 is more global, and it seems impossible that it's going to not go around the world. I think they're fighting to keep it, but it's, well, I don't know if I should be pessimistic or not, but I think it seems very difficult, given what we know, that it's not going to go global and persistent.
I think it will stop in springtime. I
Well,
can
but
say
then we
it's
have
after.
However, the thing is, as in fact one of our colleagues on the class there who was with us last week in the US, Suma, it's already affected so many people in Malaysia, which is a tropical country. So,
Really?
yeah, and Singapore has hundreds of cases.
In hot
It's
weather.
tropical. So it doesn't, I initially think, well, yes, it will change with the spring, but actually tropical
It's
countries, it's widespread
So
already.
then the only hope is a vaccination.
I guess the
I think we
vaccination.
need 1 year
Yeah,
to improve it.
yeah. So it's going, it's hot
Very
countries
difficult.
have it too.
I know it.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Hocam baharda tercih bekliyoruz dedi ama hafta olarak Darryl da dedi ki
Tropikal sıcak ülkelerde de var.
Malezya,
Baharda
In Singapore.
azalacak.
Yani bu arada sıcaklık
Artarsa
kaybolur.
gene
Ama tropikal ülkelerde de varmış. Malezya'da varmış. Sıcak oralar şu anda.
Yani orada varsa demek ki
What about
kaybolmaz.
the Australia, your country?
New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Well, New Zealand,
Now it's in summer.
actually in New Zealand is summer going, yes, still summer. But it actually, the first case in New Zealand was a few days ago. Australia had some before, but yes,
Only very few cases. Huh?
yeah.
Söyledim. Kaç bakalım.
But it's,
Bir veya iki. Onu sorduk. Bir veya iki.
but it will, of course, spread. You know, it's cases around here.
Söylediğine bakılırsa zaten kaçınılmaz bir şey
Tabii
yani.
yani. Bir de devamlı her yerde herkese karşılaşıyoruz. No, she says, you know, people are coming or going all the time. I mean, that will be a guest from Australia coming to her. Other people are coming to us. I'm going, you are coming. There's a, you know, you can't stop that.
You can't
And
stop.
we meet people all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
Bilemeyiz.
Bilemiyorsunuz ki.
Şanslı yılımızla ilgili bir şey.
Yani ya şu an dışarıda yemek yediğiniz restoranda yani oturduğunuz
Zaten
kişi.
kuluçka dönemi 15 günden önce anlaşılmıyor.
Aynen öyle.
Yani bu kişide belki kuluçka dönemi hasta, geçirici şey var ama bilemiyoruz onu.
Aynen öyle. Hakikaten Darryl'ın dediği gibi dua etme periyodu galiba artık we say, you know, it's not coming, you know, you're praying. You
Yeah.
can't stop praying.
That's
It's
right.
true.
Ve love and love.
And love, praying and love is good. Hocam hakikaten ne yapacağız?
Stress.
No
That's
stress.
right. Yes, love of life. This is it.
Love of life is a wonderful thing.
Do you know one biggest porn site called Pornhub? You know, and
Hiçbir şey yapmayacağız.
announced that it's free to get premium membership for the affected countries.
Really?
Yeah, because
Keep avoiding
have sex
virtual sex.
force. Yeah, virtual sex is better than real sex now.
It's interesting. Buraya geldik artık. Tamam, buraya ulaştı olay.
Antik çağlar dönemi.
Yes, you always have some interesting comments, Haka. Do you have some questions? Please, yeah. The comments?
I think they were very
Eğitimle ilgili bir soru sorsanız arasıyla kalmışsınız. Böyle çok soramıyorum.
I will send them to your workshops because we will be having our first lecture together this week on Friday. I will be meeting them totally for the first time, and now she's kind of the representative of the group, hearing about I will say, you know, American University of Sovereign Nations,
Yes.
and we can have more fun. Of course, if there is no travel bans, you know, to come into the workshops, but let's hope that by summer it will
I hope in some
Well, our workshops are everywhere, so
Yes.
countries.
in
So
those
it's no problem.
countries.
Yeah.
Bu bizim herhalde ilk bağlama şeyimizdi.
Aynen öyle. Biz de hep bağlarız ya.
Yeah. And so this is one of our colleagues from the Philippines
Bu
also.
aktarlardan dolayı.
So really, according, well, in fact, one of our colleagues from the Philippines, Margis, is telling us that according to WHO, the COVID has sort of stopped spreading in the Philippines. There's 39 cases. There was also a death.
Evet.
Philippines is also a tropical country. That maybe WHO is thinking they may have stopped it, but we'll see. But it's good if they can stop the spread. But the Philippines is also one of the countries.
Katkınız çok değerli. İyi ki geldiniz.
Ama ne kadar güzel. Kendisi de söylüyor bilim evrensel
Aynen
üniversiteler.
öyle. They are really amazed with your
İkili
kind of
kadro aynı
approach
şeyleri-
to life, to bioethics and to universities.
Oh.
This is something we need in this age. This universalism mind.
Yes.
Because the more technology is increasing, the more transportation is increasing. This universal approach is not improving as
Yes.
fast.
Her dilde aynı kaygıları taşıyoruz.
Aynen öyle. We have common fears, common goals,
We do. And we have to realize
common
it.
worries. We have to realize it. These common worries.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ayrıca sizlere teşekkür ederiz.
Sağ olun,
Sayenizde
geldiğiniz için.
faydalandık.